we'll jump straight into Bradley Barcola. So there's been reports from Loic Tanzi, who are saying that Liverpool are very, very, very interested in Bradley Barcola. And Jules Lawrence a few months ago actually said that Richard Hughes was a massive fan of the Frenchman. And just literally before we went live, Fabrice Hawkins, who is probably one of, if not the most reliable journalist in France, also confirmed Liverpool's interest in I believe he's 22, the PSG winger. Race. This has kind of come out of nowhere. We all know, obviously, Bradley Barcola is appreciated by a lot of clubs in Europe. Not a surprise that we're one of them. However, we're going to get onto Isak later, but with Isak kind of feeling pretty much done, the fact that we were linked with Rodrigo previously, and the links have still been strong with that. Now Bradley Barcola, there is space in the squad for a left winger. It's very surprising, isn't it? But it does make sense.
Yeah, it is an interesting thing to think about. Like, even going back to the Isak stuff, the fact that, we signed Ekitike, to play up front. But we're still very interested in Isak, obviously. We're still looking to boost our attack. And it's like, it just really is, it's kind of surprising me, like, wow, we still have, some things to do there. Because I still think, getting a center back is certainly a big need for this group, just getting some depth at that position, but we're still going for attack. And then obviously I think this also partly hinges on, the Isak stuff, because you see that, that move for Isak is still kind of dependent on Newcastle finding a replacement for Isak, if they would sell him. And seeing today that Sesko looks like he's heading to Manchester United, now that was they're in a battle with Newcastle, and Newcastle now might have to flip towards someone else. And so it seemed like, there's so many moving parts in this window, because the team has to buy a replacement and then they're willing to sell. And then for us, like, are we gonna, still hold out for Isak, and then, but are we still looking to sign an attacker this window? It's like, this Isak thing, it seems to me, like it's so much out of Isak wanting to come to us, and so we're gonna make it happen because we're this window we've just got a absolute war chest of money, so we're able to make that happen. But it seems like we're still interested in trying to boost our attack, and so, and if you look on that left hand side, of course we have Gakpo there. I think Ekitike can slide out to the left hand side, but maybe he's gonna play through the middle. It's still unclear what exactly our plans are with that. And then of course we have the young lad Rio here, who's really impressed in preseason. Is there going to be a role for him this year? And of course, we just obviously sold Luis Diaz. So it's interesting to think we would be interested in Barcola, with PSG. Obviously, they're just won the Champions League, or they won the treble, really. How those negotiations would go with them wanting to sell to a direct competitor in the Champions League, or like why they would necessarily part with such a young talent who just came off a really a breakthrough season there. I'm looking at 21 goals, 20 assists in all competitions. For PSG to sell, that would be an interesting thing for them to do. But I'm not sure what their, I'm sure their finances are all good and stuff. But just it'd be a massive price tag. I don't know. This is obviously just coming in today, so we'll see how concrete this is and what our interest is like. So
I think one thing that's really interesting is Liverpool were linked with Kvaratskhelia before he went to PSG, and we bid for him. I believe the bid was 100 million, and that was still whilst we had Luis Diaz and Cody Gakpo. It very much to me feels like Liverpool want two players in each position. Now, people are going to be baffled by that because we're not just signing one amazing player and then one £30 million player. Seems like Liverpool have really got it into the head that you have to strengthen while you're on top. And whilst on paper 80 million for Ekitike and potentially 100 million for Barcola, who might not start, seems crazy. You play a lot of minutes. There's a lot of football that's going on, and there's only going to be more, with how FIFA and, the Saudis are getting involved. Barcola, for me, I think he's perfect. I've been utterly convinced that we're signing a left winger this summer, because you look at the attacking options we have. Let's just say Darwin Núñez is gone. We'll speak about Darwin Núñez later, but Darwin Núñez is gone, and I'm pretty confident Federico Chiesa has also said, if you can get what we brought you in for, you can go, which I think will most likely happen. So let's say them two are out the door. We've got on the left wing Cody Gakpo and a 16-year-old who Liverpool have never, ever, ever, ever pushed youngsters into the first team too early. The earliest youngster I can remember in my memory of being a Liverpool fan is Trent, and he was 19. Before that, it was probably someone like Michael Owen, and look how Michael Owen's career turned out. Liverpool will not push Rio Ngamoa into the first team this season. He might be first team training, he might be with them, he might be in, EFL Cups, he might get maybe a bit off the bench. He will not start this season. As much as we would love him to, I just don't see a world where that happens. On the right, we have Mo Salah. That's it. Ben Doak isn't, I don't even think he's staying either. I think you get 25 mil for him, he's probably off as well. And then up front, you've got Ekitike. That's it. We have 3 forwards, so us going out and signing Alexander Isak and signing Rodrigo / Barcola is definitely not on the card. Yes, it's expensive backups, but all of these players can play multiple positions. Ekitike, as you said, can play on the left. He can play as a striker. He can play as a false 9. Vert as well can play on the left. He can play as a false 9 if needed. If you bring Barcola in, left, right. If you bring Rodrigo in, left, right. We're not signing one-dimensional players here. We're signing them players who can bring so much in. My only concern with Barcola is if he would leave because, as you mentioned, PSG are one of the best teams in Europe. And the thing is, Race, he doesn't actually start for them. Kvaratskhelia has been so good since he got there. He is a backup, and potentially he could get more minutes with us because as good as Cody Gakpo is, he is the weak link. Now, I say weak link in parentheses because the weak link is still an extremely unbelievable player, but it just happens that he's the worst out of a group of unbelievable footballers. I think if you can convince Barcola and say, look, Luis Diaz and Cody Gakpo swapped last year. It will be the exact same situation. You're going to get more minutes with us as you are with PSG, if not more. There's definitely more room for your future at us because I think Cody Gakpo is one that could potentially leave in a couple of years. I think if similar to Luis Diaz, if Liverpool receive an offer for him and they think that it's worth it, that path is open a lot more than for other players. So I think the future proof of Barcola works. He's only, as we've said, 22, and I just think the project's better than PSG's. Look, I think what Luis Enrique's built at Liverpool, PSG is unbelievable, but PSG over the years they've always got drawn into that big player, and I think with the owners it's going to be hard for them to get away from that. Who knows if Lamine Yamal is available one day, but if anyone's going to bid 300 million for a player, it's going to be PSG, and it's going to be for Lamine Yamal, and I think they might go back to the old ways. But the price that's being quoted, Race, is 100 million euros. I think that's a fairly reasonable price for a player of, yes, he's very slender, but so is Ekitike, and we saw him against Bilbao, obviously a preseason game. He looked quite physical, quite strong. 100 mil for his potential for what he can offer. I think I would be all over that personally.
Yeah, and you make a great point on, you break it down our attack there. Like, you're right. I mean, with Nunez seemingly out the door here and Chiesa, I think, more likely than not to leave. Like, yeah, our attack options are pretty slim. And you look at last year, obviously we were great team and all, won the league and stuff, but our attack certainly dried up, and part of that was not having a consistent striker, and it's hopefully we've got that in Ekitike. But yeah, you're right. I mean, it might look crowded to begin the season because we're gonna only have 1 game a week, and then 3 games in the next month or whatever. But then once the midweek games come, the Champions Leagues and all that stuff, congested fixtures and all that, I mean, you really start to find minutes for everyone, and of course injuries happen too, so you have to be mindful of that as well. And so and obviously depth is just all around important, and seemingly with our mindset of just having the money and being very aggressive in this window, yeah, it makes a lot of sense to bring in another attacker, and there's no reason to be cheap about it. We've shown we're willing to spend the money, and so we don't need to go bargain shopping, although we have in the past with other players in our squad, we'd be able to get these players for bargain stuff, but in attack it's probably more expensive because obviously it's attack, it's scoring goals, that's what's most valuable in this game. So it's not like you're getting McAllister on a 35-40 million deal or Gravenberch for cheap from Bayern. It's the attack. You're not going to find many bargains per se in the window. If you want a quality player, you're gonna have to spend the money. That's why we spent 75 million or whatever for Nunez. It's not gonna be cheap, especially in that position and that getting that age for a player. And I think the Gakpo point you made is interesting because it's kind of the same path as, well, we brought in Diaz when he was a little older than Gakpo. Gakpo's only I think 22 or 23 when he's coming in. Gakpo's already he's 26 now. As you mentioned, in a couple of years he's going to be obviously 28, 29. He's going to be looking for, that next contract. And are we willing to give that to a player that's, as we just showed with Luis Diaz, although I think Cody Gakpo is better than Luis Diaz for us, are we willing to give that type of deal to an older player? So it's a good point you made on that. Yeah. I think after what you kind of laid out there, definitely getting another attacker, whether that's Isak or Barcola or both, it's certainly it's an area that we I guess we do have to address.
Yeah, definitely. I think to kind of close it off, I think if we can somehow get Barcola, it has to be done. As we've said with a lot of transfers, it's a market opportunity. Yes, it seems expensive now, but this market opportunity might not come up again. And if it does, it's going to be a hell of a lot more expensive. Like with Vert, like with Isak, maybe they weren't in the plans, but they're in the plans now. I think the real big question is his physicality. He's, I think he's 6'2", 6'3", and he's very, very skinny. But players fill out. It's once he's in that physical game, and again, Liverpool aren't going to sign a player without having a plan for them. That's the end. If Richard Hughes thinks that he can work, then he can work. I've had no reason not to trust Michael Edwards over the 10 years he was at the club. I had no reason to not trust Arnie Slot and the players, even though at times I thought, what's he doing? 99.9% of the time he's proven him right. And Richard Hughes, he's done an amazing job. So if they want Barcola, I say we get Barcola.